Very good.
First of all, it's very hard just starting off. But the halacha really is before Chatzot on Tish'a BeAb, you're not supposed to greet people. And I find it extremely hard today because I see so many people I love. It's like but I really love everyone in the room, and it's really nice to see you. I shouldn't have recorded that, should I? Cut that out of the recording. Okay. Anyways, I want to start off with a question. Let's say a prophet emerged amongst us today. Okay? What do you think the Navi would say? Think about it for a sec. A man of God.
Be kinder to each other.
Okay, be more kind to other fellow human beings, for sure. Okay, we're going to come back to this question, but just something to think about. On that note, I actually want to start with a legend that you probably all heard. It's this legend of Napoleon. Napoleon was once walking on the streets of Paris on Tish'a BeAb, and he heard Jews crying. And he's like, what's going on here? What is this? And his aide told him they're mourning the destruction of their temple that happened over 1,700 years ago. Now, I want to pause there and let's just become Napoleon for a second. So Napoleon keeps on walking. He walks into the shul and he sees Jews on the floor. He asks them questions, like he probably thinks we're crazy. And so that we end up telling him, oh, by the way, we actually started our morning practices from the start of Av, right? The Mishnah in Ta'anit says, Mishenichnas Av Mematin Besimcha. When the month of Av begins, you're supposed to have less simcha. And so actually, we didn't eat meat for a long time. The week of Tish'a BeAb, you're not supposed to launder your clothing. This year's a little bit different, but in general. What else don't we do? Listening to music, right? Clearly, it's a different type of period. So he is like, okay, I thought the Jews were crazy, now I think they're really crazy. I don't understand them. And now putting the legend aside, it's very interesting because on Pesach, we contemplate freedom. On Sukkot, we're thinking about happiness. On Rosh Hashanah, we're thinking about justice, Yom Kippur, atonement. And then Tish'a BeAv comes and we contemplate loss. That's so interesting and odd. We're not celebrating what we have. Usually we get up and we say, yes, look at our institutions, our rabbis, our community. Today we say, yeah, what are we lacking? We lack a temple. We lack a high court, Sanhedrin. We lack unity. We sit and we mourn. It's really crazy if you think about it. A lot of us mourned as a nation before we mourned for a loved one. Thank God both my parents are still alive, but we're mourning. I'm mourning. We're all mourning here today. I think the key to this is actually found at the end of the legend I started off with. The end of the legend ends with like this. So after his aide told him, they're mourning for a temple that was destroyed over 1,700 years ago, Napoleon responds and he says, a people who can mourn for Jerusalem so long will one day have it restored to them. That last line contains so much truth, and hopefully we'll really get to that truth over the course of this class. So, it's very easy to ignore what's going on in our life. Rabbi Joey Dweck actually mentioned this concept a few years ago. He spoke about the elephant in the room, right? The elephant in the room, be along with the elephant. That thing that's like happening in your house or like between a relationship that's awkward and odd, so you don't want to bring it up. That's the elephant in the room. You could fill in the blank. Everyone has their own elephants in the room. I mean, I actually asked my mother if I could say this. Don't worry, it ended well. And we're gonna get there too. But I'm not joking. Probably for a week, every time we texted each other, we were getting annoyed at each other. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I kept on calling my sister Samantha for help. I'm like, what do? Every time I get a text from mommy, I want to shoot myself, whatever.
Yeah.
And the same thing. And I'll talk about how we...
And then my mom would say, everything Victoria's doing is bothering me.
Yeah.
So I'm like, should I tell her that Victoria just told me the same thing?
So thank God we had a middleman.
Yeah, it helps.
We eventually spoke to each other and discussed it. Don't worry, we'll get there. But that was an example of an elephant in the room that was over the course of a few weeks. Or, but everyone can fill in their own elephant in the room. Yeah. You see a child depressed, down, and, that needs to be discussed at a certain point. You see someone not caring for themselves, fill in the blank, anything that's just happening in your life that needs to be addressed, but it's not. So, it's interesting. So, over the course, usually on every Shabbat, we read the parasha in shul, right? The weekly portion, and alongside that, we read the Haftarah. The Haftarah is another section of text that comes from the Nevi'im, the prophets. Now, usually, these portions are somehow related to the parasha. But these past 3 weeks, right, the 3 weeks, starting from Yud Zayin Tammuz until Tish'a BeAb, we were reading different haftarot that really, sometimes they were connected slightly to the parasha, but essentially they were what the Hachamim put them in place to tell us what we should be thinking about during the 3 weeks. Now, once I recognized this and understood this, I really found myself reading the haftarot through a different lens. Because usually I just focus on the parasha, but I'm like, wow, there's a lot of truth here that I want to uncover with you that, I think we'll connect to that elephant in the room. So actually, the haftarah that we read, the first of these 3 weeks, was from Sefer Yirmiyahu. Okay, who's Yirmiyahu? Yirmiyahu Navi, he probably born 650 BCE in Anatot. He was a Kohen. He knew that the Babylonians were coming and approaching, and he was really in charge of rebuking the nation and telling them, look, destruction is on its way, you gotta reform your ways. We're gonna talk about him a little bit and his experience as a prophet. Not so great. Okay, so, like I said, you could use a Tanakh in this class, but I'm gonna read it and explain it in English so you get it, So God tells Yirmiyahu, this is actually when he's being appointed as a prophet, that he divad Adonai elai lemor. God tells him, before I formed you in the belly, I knew you. I had a relationship with you. Before you even left your mother's womb, I picked you. I appointed you. I am making you a Navi, a prophet amongst the nations. Not only is he going to prophesy to Am Yisrael, he's going to talk to Goyim, non-Jews. But I think this is also interesting. He's basically telling him, we could think about how does this jive with Bechida Chofshit? Before you were even born, I knew you were the guy. I don't know. Anyone have any thoughts? How we could make those two jive? I have some thoughts too. God, just to throw that out there.
He was special. He was not the typical person.
Right. For sure.
I think he was something a little out of the normal scheme.
Right. Yeah. In other words, Harambam would explain it along the lines of that, saying that he had the attributes. Now he just had to utilize them and hone them in and develop them, and then you could really become a great prophet. For example, if you have long arms, long limbs, you could really be a great swimmer. Now, are you going to, utilize that, train yourself? Okay, great. Now, basically, Yirmiyahu, you have the potential. And what does Yirmiyahu say? He says, aha, basically he's crying out, what do you mean? Adonai Elohim, hineh lo yadati daber, I can't even speak. Ki na'ar anochi, I'm just like a little na'ar. I'm immature. Does it sound familiar to anyone? Moshe, right? Lo ish devarim anochi. I can't speak, I'm not the man for the job. And by the way, another great prophet, Yeshayahu, also says, Ki ish temes efatayim ani. He says, I have unclean lips. All good prophets, all good people, just in general. If you give someone a position of leadership, and they're like, yeah, I would be great for the job, they turn them down first. I can't do this. I'm not the person for this. I'm too young. I'm too immature. And God says, no, Yirmiyahu. Al tomad na'ar anochi. Don't say you're a na'ar. Ki al kol asher eshalecha telech. Wherever I send you, you're going to go. Ve'et kol asher atzavecha tedaber. And whatever I tell you to say, you're going to say. Al tirami penehem. Do not be afraid. Ki itecha ani lahatzilcha ne'um Hashem. I'm with you. I'm going to save you. So, what does Hashem do? We're going to discuss this. Vayishlach Hashem et yado vayiga al pi. He throws it in his mouth, and he says, Vayamar Adonai elai, hineh natati devari bepicha. I now put my words into your mouth. basically, you're gonna say everything I tell you. I'm gonna stand up actually, because it's easier. So I wanna stand by a podium, I
Why
guess
not? It's easier.
It really is actually.
Yeah.
And then he says, I love this pasuk, which we're going to get back to. He says, I've appointed you today, on all the nations, I'm going to explain these words. He says, to root out, to pull down, destroy, overthrow, and then livnot v'lintoa, to build and to plant. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of terrible, but hopefully positive too. And God says, "Vahi devar Adonai elai lemar, ma ata ro'eh Yirmiyahu." What do you see, Yirmiyahu? And he says, "Makel shaked ani ro'eh." He sees a rod of an almond tree. Very odd. There's a lot of symbolism here. And God says, "Oh, hetav tal, you see well, you see the right thing." Ki shaked ani al devarai la'asata. Whatever I say is going to happen, it's going to happen very quickly. Makel shaked, shoked. It's a play on the word. And now God says, he tells him a second time, what do you see? And he says, Sir nafuach ani ro'eh. He sees a seething pot from the north. Upanav mipnei safon, and it's coming from the north. God says, what's this seething pot you see? What are these things that are emerging? He says, misafon tipatach hara'ah. From the north, evil is going to come. Al kol yoshevei haaretz. This is Babel coming. Remember I said Yirmiyahu is going to be the prophet that's going to have to warn the people about Babel coming? This is what God's saying. God's saying, you know what's going to happen? I'm calling all the kingdoms. Basically, they're going to come set up shop in Yerushalayim. And I'm going to cast my judgment upon the people on their terrible ways because they're serving other gods. Now I'm just going to translate. They're bowing down to the things that they create with their own hands. And now, Yirmiyahu, te'ezor motnecha. Gird your loins, like tie your belts, get ready. V'kam taver divat alem, and you're going to speak to them. Anything I tell you, you're going to say. Al techati b'nehim, do not be afraid. I'm going to make you, God says, le'ir mifsad, a fortified city, la'amud barzel, an iron pillar, u'lechomot nechoshech, bronze walls, akol ha'aretz, le'malchei Yehuda l'sareha le'kahaneha le'am ha'aretz. And they're going to fight with you, but they're not going to overcome you. Ki itecha ani me'um Adonai v'hatzilcha. I'm going to be with you to save you. Okay, I just read a lot. What are your thoughts? I just read you what God tells Yirmiyahu, how he's going to be with him. What do you make believe you're Yirmiyahu? Like, what are you thinking?
It's more like a dream. I don't know.
Right.
Nightmare.
It doesn't sound real.
More like a nightmare that Babel's coming and he has to pass on.
100%. It sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's going to war. You know, like, God, you're loins. Like, get ready. You know, you're going to fight, but they're not going to destroy you. And you're going to do it.
So overwhelming.
Oh my gosh. So overwhelming. 100%. I'd be terrified. Like, this is what Yirmiyahu, guys, is going to have a terrible life as a prophet. They're going to throw him into prison. The people are going to fight against him. They're not going to want to listen to him. He's going to have to fight against Nevi'ei Sheker, false prophets. So they're going to say, don't listen to him. What is Yirmiyahu saying? He doesn't know better. Terrible, terrible, terrible. And I think that's just interesting to think about because no one really wants to listen to the prophet, guys. Prophet's annoying. An annoying truth, right? Like be quiet, Yirmiyahu. Let's pause there for a second. Just in general, like what is the role of a prophet? When you think of like a Navi, okay? What do you think a Navi does? Like if he had a job description of a prophet.
Today, in these days.
I promise. Like think about different stories you know, in Tanakh, in Torah, that you've heard. This story, like what does a Navi do?
Guides, leads, represents.
Right. Guides, leads, represents. They're God's representative. Sets an example. 100% yes, Sam?
I think he looks at the people and sees like what they need to hear for them to grow for the future.
Right. So he's helping them grow. 100%. It's so interesting actually. When the first time Navi comes up in the Torah, it's describing Abraham when he prays for Abimelech. Abimelech, his kingdom, because he took Sarah, wasn't able to have kids, and he's acting as a middleman. He's connecting to God, praying to God, Because an Navi is very much a middleman between God and the people and God. Again, telling them what God is going to tell them, guiding them along their ways, 100%. And he's basically God's mouthpiece in a way. And I think that's what we're hearing, like, I'm going to put my words into your mouth, because this is his role. I'm telling you something divine, now share it with the people. And why is a Navi necessary? Like, why do we need Nevi'im? What are we missing today without a Navi?
God's word.
God's word. I mean,
Direction.
I wonder, I really
Bird's eye view.
Bird's eye view. Like,
Yeah.
think about it today. If a Navi just emerged, would we believe him? You know, like,
Probably not.
probably not. Right? Everyone's saying, no, he's fake. No, he's real.
Depends on
What
what
do you
he's
mean?
telling us, if we want to hear what he's telling us.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because I'm also just going back to what I said at the start. Today we think about what we lack. We do lack prophecy. And that is something to think about. We do lack that connection with God. It's not easy to become a prophet. Harambam describes it in the Mishneh Torah, but just a thought to think about. Okay, now, so I said we were going to discuss the Haftarah. So that was Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu, as we just noted, about to fight in war. Really, he's just going to go set some words, but very hard task. Yeshayahu, this is actually this past week's parasha. And if anyone wants to flabash and have Marafayeli, anyone have a Marafayeli? No? Teddy, did you have it? Did you have it for Navi?
No, that's wrong.
For what? For Hebrew? Lashon, yeah, okay. So I had it for Navi, which I don't ever think he ever taught Navi to a lot of classes. So I'm really happy I got him. So have you had it?
Yeah. I know שימוש המים מאזיני הארץ. כי יש-
Okay, so I'm a teacher.
Hey.
And teachers always debate, like, should we make kids memorize stuff, right? And then, by the way, you end up finishing school, and anything you had to memorize, I still know by heart till today. What did we do in Mars class? So we thought it was probably a waste of time. No, Samantha?
Yeah.
He spent so much time doing this. Like, every kid was probably, yeah, thank God, but not learning.
Right.
What would he do? We would all recite the Pesukim together. Shem'u, Shamayim, Hazini, and he would slowly at the start of class, and he would read it with expression. And till this day, I know the first half of this Perek by heart because of Mara Fa'eli. And now, so first of all, I read these Pesukim and I hear his voice. But also, like, now I get to study them and know them well, and I'm like, oh wow, Mara, thank you for teaching them to us. So, what's going on here? What are these Pesukim that Mara Fa'eli told us about? Shim'u shamayim v'hazini eretz. Listen, the heaven and the sky. This is actually very similar to Hazinu. Hazinu in the Torah, Moshe says the same word, Shamayim and Aretz. Ki Hashem diber. Banim gidalti veramamti vehem pashubi. I raised my kids and they rebelled against me. If we're parents, we could understand this pasuk well. For kids, we could probably understand it. Everyone in the room knows what Yeshayahu is saying. By the way, God is oftentimes parent-child relationship. And now not only are we like kids that rebelled against our parents, but Yeshayahu says, Yada shor koneho, an animal, an ox, knows his owner. Chamar evus be'alav, the chamar knows, the donkey knows where the animal's going to feed him, right? He always knows it's going to be in that corner of the room. Yisrael lo yada, but we don't know. Ami lo hadbanan, we don't understand this. Basically, Yeshayahu is saying, you're worse than animals. Hoy, goy choteh, how could it be, you sinning nation? Choteh, meaning you go off the mark. Am keved avon, you have so many avonot, so many sins. Zera merein, you're terrible. You left God, Kedosh Yisrael, you abandoned him. He says, Al metuku ad, why do you want further beatings? Tosifu sarah, you keep on sinning. Kirosh lecholi ulechol levav devai. You have like a what's it called? You're ailing there. Your heart's sick. Mikaf regel adrosh. From your foot to your head, every single piece of your body has a makkah on it. And bometom, there's no like place without a makkah. Petza v'chabura umakkah tirya, every single type of, like every single type of slap. Lo zoru, lo chovashu, you're not caring for them. Lo rukaka b'shemen, you're not putting on them neosporin. But what are you doing to yourself? Yeshayahu, if we just pause here for a second, right? Wake up, guys. Smell the coffee. Do you see what's going on here? Look at yourselves. You have so many makot on you. Tend to yourself. What's going on? You wake up and you want more and more and more and more. Something's not going right here. Again, the Navi is coming to wake up the people. And I mean, just as a side point, something from I'm telling this to you because I think it's helpful. I do it for myself. I used to like just read a Navi and I'm the type of person that just wants to know what all the Pesukim mean. I just want to keep on going and know more. But then I realized when I learn in general, when I read Pesukim, I really have to slow down. I have to slow down and really think about, like, what is the Navi really coming to teach us? This is the word of God. There's a lot of truth here. So really for us, as we're reading, to think about, what is Yeshayahu trying to tell us? I'm telling you, it changes your perspective when you learn. And Yeshayahu continues to speak, and he says, not only is your body, dreadful, with a bunch of makot, your land is also desolate. And foreign nations are coming, and they're destroying your land. And you basically he compares our dwelling to like a sukkah, which is something that's not permanent. What's going on, guys? And then he compares us to Sodom and Amorah. Sodom and Amorah. When you think of Sodom and Amorah, what do you think of? What words pop into your brain? Or stories?
Destroyed.
They were destroyed, right? Because they were a terrible society. Just to ring some bells, I actually teach this to my freshmen in 9th grade. It's very interesting. And I love that I get to teach this pedic because, okay, you'll see, I don't know, but I'll reference it. So basically, they want to rape Lot's guest, okay? So it's interesting just to discuss this in a Torah context in class. It's very healthy, I think, for kids, because then they go out into the world and they're messed up. They hear a lot of different voices. At least come here from a Torah teacher beforehand. They come in and they say, Ayeha anashim asher Lot, right? Let me back up for a second. Lot, Abraham's nephew, decides that he wants to move to Sodom because there's a lot of land there and it's, for business basically. Interesting, his values, and he chooses to live in Sodom instead of sticking with Uncle Abraham, who was, basically raised you until now. Okay, well, I don't know what that was about. It doesn't end well for him when he puts himself into Sodom, and he ends up his midot of chesed become very Sodom-like, they're twisted. So while he invites the malachim over into his house, when the people of Sodom come, and now this is what the people of Sodom say. They say, where are these guests you invited? They don't like anyone. They don't want to share anything. We want to know them. Basically, we want to rape them. And what does Lot say? Again, because he was influenced by Sodom, listen to his response. He says, I have 2 daughters. They never knew any man. I'll give them to you. Do what you want with them. But don't do anything to these people. Yeah.
Crazy values.
Well, it's,
Crazy values.
Wow.
It really
Give
is.
up your daughters for
It really is. And imagine, he was also living with Abraham, the Sadiq. But again, it really goes to show you, and I talk about this with my students in general, I ask them different decisions they have in their life. Even between which high schools they're going to, and how does that affect you? How do your friends affect you? Even when your parents, I say, decide where they're going to live. Why do they decide here and not there? And how your surroundings are a huge part of influencing you. And this is what Yeshayahu is comparing us to. Another little piece of this story. When Lot was in Sodom, and the Malachim come to save him, he tells his son-in-laws, he says, Kumu se'u min hamakom, get up, ki mashchit Adonai et ha'ir hazeh. God is going to destroy this city. And the Pesukim say, Vayhi kemesachek be'enecha tanav. He's like a joker. They laugh at him. What are you saying, Lord? Now, guys, we should be baffled by this. 3 seconds ago, Sodom, the people of Sodom, were surrounding Lot's house, and the Pesukim tell us that these people, the Malachim who came to visit Lot, struck them with sanverim. The Hachamim say that's they made them blind. Basically, they couldn't get into Lot's house because now they're struck with blindness, they can't get in. Didn't they just see that? What do you mean? You think that Lot's kidding? He's not joking. Why do you think Lot's son-in-laws thought Lot was joking? That being the case, they should be okay, let's go, we're going to pack up our bags. Did you ever think about it? Let's think about it now. Yeah.
I always tell my kids and my grandkids, whatever, they look at him nuts, so why would they look at him and think that he was not crazy?
Right.
If I said tomorrow this thing was gonna get destroyed, they would look at me crazy anyway, but that doesn't really change like that. That's the real, I say reactions to something like that.
Right, it's so odd, like, the city doesn't just get destroyed, 100%.
Like, no one's gonna believe that.
Right. I don't know what you're saying.
Right.
Or like, I wonder, when you're so stuck in your own reality, right? He's living in Sodom. Sodom is evil, but so that's where they're going to be destroyed. They're thinking, what are you saying? We're regular people living our lives, they're regular routine, everything is going well. You think the city's going to be destroyed? It's almost like the people of Sodom are living in their own reality.
What today?
Today.
I mean, everyone has.
We can't accept
their own-
change like
their
that.
Echo
That's
chambers,
exactly
and
what
you could very easy to justify when you hear new information that doesn't agree with what
Yeah,
you think. It's
exactly.
very easy to dismiss it. So
Yes,
easy.
we can't accept it because it's too
Not what we wanna
tremendous.
hear.
It's so true.
We don't wanna hear it, exactly.
Exactly.
We block it out.
We block it out, right? And it's so interesting discussing this with students and to ask them, what do they think? I bring up I bring up a few interesting examples with them of things that everyone does and we just accept it. Should we really just accept it? Let's think about it together, I tell them. And I love that class because it's important for all of us here, and I think that what's really going on here is going back to our role of a Navi. This is what the prophet has to do. A prophet has to come in. Remember the prophet's comparing us to Sodom and Amorah, to this son-in-law who's saying, you're crazy, this is not going to happen, right? To a people living in a reality and thinking all is going well, the Navi has to come and say, hello, wake up. Yirmiyahu was about to fight in war, right? Yeshayahu is telling these people that keep on beating themselves up. They're not getting the picture. Now, it's almost like, no. So now, I want to continue forward, and there's a Mishnah. The Mishnah in Tani says the following. The Mishnah says that a few things happened on Tish'a BeAb. And one of those things are, the Tish'a BeAb nigzar al avotenu shelo yikansu la'aretz. On Tish'a BeAb, we were told we were not going to enter the land. The Hachamim say this is referring to Chet HaMeraglim, right, the sin of the spies. Now, what the Gemara proceeds and says the following. The pasuk says, "Vatisa kol ha'edah vayitnu et kolam." This is in the context. We're going to look at the pasukim in a second, but in the context of Chet HaMeraglim, the people sin and they cry. And Rabbi Yochanan says, "Oto halayla leil Tish'a BeAv haya." That night was Tish'a BeAv. Amar lana Kadosh Baruch Hu liYisrael. God tells Am Yisrael, "Atem bechitem bechiyah shel chinam." You cried for no reason. The sin of the spies, which we'll talk about in a second. Ve'ani ekba lachem bechiyah shel dorot. Because of this, because you cried for no reason, I am going to make sure you cry for future generations, and you're going to have a reason to cry. It's going to be much worse. Terrible. Now, speaking of the sin of the spies, we all know the story, right? We're entering Israel. The sin of the spies is actually recorded 2 times in the Torah, in Sefer Bamidbar and Sefer Devarim. It's interesting to compare. There are differences, which could be a class in and of itself. But just broadly speaking now, Moshe tells the spies that he's going to send in. He says, go in and see. Go look at the land, Mahi, and the Am that's sitting there. What do they look like? Chazak or Rafeh, are they strong, are they weak? Hamat Imrav, are they few, are they many? Maha'aretz, what does the land look like? You know, is it lean? Are there trees? V'hitkazaktem, be strong. Ulekachtem min ha'uperi ha'aretz, take back from the land, and you're going to show us. They're going to show us the fruits when they get back. And what happens? So they end up, the Meraglim go, they come back, and they say, we went to this land, Begam, Zavat, Chalav, Udvash, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. The Zed Pirya, oh my gosh, check out these fruit guys, whoa, this is an awesome land. And then, this is the big but, Ephes. But, however, and then they just change gears. Ki az ha'am, the nation there is so strong. These cities are all, their cities are all walled. The gam yelideha anaka inusham, we saw this, the kids of the giants there. Amalek yoshev be'eretz hanegev. Amalek is in the south. Hachiti, Yevosi, there are all these foreign nations. Knaani, Aliyat Yarden. We can't do this, guys. This is dreadful. You don't want to fight against this. And also now think about who they're speaking to. This nation just left Egypt. So this doesn't go well. And again, I want you to think of a nation in panic, right? And then we have our superhero, Caleb ben Yefuneh. It says, Vayahas Caleb et ha'am. He gets up and he silences the people. And he says, Alon aleh, no, guys, let's go up. Ve'arashnu otam, let's inherit. Ki achon nuchala, we could do this. And the people around him say, no, lo nuchal la'alot et ha'am. Ki chazaku, they're stronger than us. And they start lying about the land. And that pasuk that I told you about them crying comes up. And the people are crying. They're for sure not listening to Caleb. They're convinced otherwise. Now, how does Caleb do what he does? How does he do that? It's really like, if you really just stop and think, everyone around you is saying otherwise. Every other scout, except Yehoshua, who also speaks up later, is saying, we can't do this. Terrible. This land looks great. Look at the fruit is great, but we can't conquer these people. How does someone emerge like that?
He really believes it
He really believes
in
it.
his heart. Like when you know something's true, even though everyone around you doesn't, you could stand on it.
Right.
And also he doesn't care what other people think. He just does what's right.
Hard to do.
Very
That is-
hard.
That is so hard to do. He knows the truth and he sounds like an Navi.
He's also putting himself at risk. They could get up and stone him.
Yep.
100%. It's for sure dangerous, you're right. So even more so, good point, Mars. Even more so, now it's dangerous. He's sharing this news. I mean, because I'm thinking to ourselves, again, we read the Torah and we want to become like this. Don't we want to be the people that are going to stand up and say, what's going on here? To be those thinkers that think, everyone's doing something a certain way. You want to be that thinker that's going to think otherwise. You know what? No, we need this type of thing going on. I mean, can anyone think of an example? Like, I can think of someone telling me, like, let's say, I don't enjoy this minyan. I wish we had a better minyan. Okay, so let's make it happen. I wish there was, I could think of actually in Brooklyn, so I go to the Chayil minyan. And how did that minyan start? There really wasn't a place for young adults to come to shul. Like, all of the older parents were going to shul, not the young people. And so, like, people like Rabbi Hiddery and Esther Hiddery get up and, really start this minyan. And because of them, every week now on Shabbat, there's a place where so many people gather and learn together. Again, they were able to see and recognize. And I can think of everyone else saying, by the way, on the spot, what do you mean? Shul is great. Like, look at the minyan. There are so many people in shul. But they sit there and recognize, no, there's a pocket of people that are missing.
They spoke up for that pocket. There's a need to grow. But
Right. They recognized the need, spoke up, and did something about it.
yeah.
They had that Caleb in them. It's interesting. God says, when he speaks to Moshe, God ends up saying, everyone who complained, the people, they're not coming into the land. But he says, Caleb, he had a ruach acheret imo. What had this different spirit, like this different wind about him. Something was different with him. And it's so interesting because the same thing, guys, there's two spies that end up entering the land, right? Caleb and Yehoshua. When Yehoshua is described as the next person who's going to take command, going to take the lead after Moshe, God says about Yehoshua, Ish asher ruach bo. He's a man of spirit. They both have this ruach about him, about themselves. And it's so interesting because ruach is also used to describe nevuah. When the people complain and they say, they're complaining about the food in the desert, and Moshe says, I can't deal with this anymore. How am I going to deal with these people? God says, okay, you know what, Moshe, I'm going to help you. He says, take 70 zekenim. And the language is, he says, ve'asalti min haruach asher alecha. You're gonna take from the ruach that's upon you, you're gonna put it on the people. So again, the theme should be clear now. All of these, from the beginning, we're talking about the role of a prophet. We're talking about Yehoshua, Caleb, all of these people who are prophet-like, who have this ruach about him, or ruach about them. And I think that's what we should be striving to be like. Now look, it's very hard to become a Navi. It's very interesting actually to think about it. They actually speak about Bnei HaNevi'im in the Navi itself. And there was a school. There were schools to become Navi. And I just want to pause for a second and just reflect on that. I think it's so interesting, guys. What do you think the curriculum was? I'm a teacher, so you know that's on my brain. Like, what do you think they were doing in prophet school? I'm really asking you.
Meditating.
Meditating. It's imagine like all of us like sitting on the floor together, meditating together. I really, Samantha, I'm on board with that. I think about that. I think they were probably contemplating God, you know, the unity of God, the creation. They had to have certain traits. They had to be very creative, actually. Because think about it, a lot of the Nevi'im, like even when I was reading to you, speak about this imagery and this, like what they see. You had to be creative to be a Navi. It took a lot of hard work, let's just say that. A lot of people wanted to become Nevi'im, and a lot of people didn't become Nevi'im. It takes hard work to connect. But I guess what I want to say is the following. It's hard, but we see the Nevi'im were necessary. Because the people who they spoke to were basically lost in their own reality. And what ended up happening to them, the people in the time of Yeshayahu were destroyed. Yirmiyahu, destroyed. People that complaining about the Meraglim, right, complaining about going into Eretz Yisrael, did not enter the land. They were destroyed in the desert. They didn't see Eretz Yisrael. Now, I asked you at the start of class, the prophet emerged amongst the population today. What would the Navi say? Now, the truth is, I think the goal is for us on Tish'a BeAb to become like prophets, to become our own prophets, to think about what's going wrong in our own life. What's the elephant in the room? The reality that we all accept in our own lives, in our own families, our own relationships. What's like Yirmiyahu saw a seething pot in the north? What's our seething pot in the north? What's bubbling that we need to address in our own lives? I gave an example at the start of class with my mother and I. So what ended up happening? Just to give you some hope, like it's possible to address these elephants and to solve them. And some of them take a lot of hard work, depression, anxiety. It takes hard work. So I ended up telling my sister Samantha, I called her up, I'm like, Samantha, I need to do avodah with you. That's basically our code word. If I need to work, I have to work on something in myself, please let's talk. And I told her I can't deal with this. Every time I get a text from mommy, I'm annoyed. And we tried to get to the root of it, like why am I getting annoyed? Usually it's teaching me something about myself, not something negative about my mother. And Samantha did the same with my mother. So onto that, we always go for walks. Us, me, my sister, and my mother. And we play this game where, well, it's much easier in the past. Thank God now I'm married to Teddy. I'm telling you that. But when we used to live together, we had a lot of examples to bring up in this discussion, this game, which we all love, by the way. We speak about like the positives in our week. Like I'll tell Samantha, like one time, for example, I bought candies that I was going to use in school in my class. And I left them at home and I was burning. I'm like, shoot, I'm only teaching this paddock. This is the cliffhanger into the paddock. I need to have the candies. But I can't go home. I'm teaching 5 periods in a row. What am I going to do? Samantha got out of bed and brought the candies. Remember the blue ones? My student ran down from class to get the candies from the front of the school. So in the game that week, I said, Samantha, I have to tell you, I really appreciate you. I promise, and I still appreciate it because my kids appreciated it. Waking up out of bed, how see dead sleep.
You're giving me too much credit.
No, but it's not a small thing. I would want to sleep. But she came, she brought the candies to school. So that was like you starting with a positive. And then you said, and Samantha,
She never had any criticism. Here it comes.
Wait, but let me tell you about the criticism. The way you say the criticism is not like, you're so annoying. Like, it's also like, let's say she's spending a lot of time with her friend, I would say, Samantha, I wish we could spend more time together. Like we have, and then we would think of solutions. And I promise this would really help us progress our relationships because we uncovered things that were going wrong, which otherwise we would not address. And then time passes, and then we just don't have the best relationship. Now, thank God, we have the best relationship. So, this week when we were on our walk home, we were going to the deal test site, and we were on our way home. And everyone said, like Samantha did to me, I did to her, like the way it works is she speaks first. And then my mother and I were last. Like, oh, shoot. By the way, that was on purpose. I never start the game.
I know. I always start.
Samantha always starts. She's always courageous. I'm like, shoot, I don't want to talk. I'm not in the mood yet. So then finally, it was my mother and I. It's time to speak. And it was a little hard. Thank God Samantha was there. She really helped mediate and moderate. So that was an example of us discussing the elephant in the room that really was, because my mother and I were not speaking about this. We were just speaking about it to Samantha.
And they were getting annoyed at each other because they're too similar.
Right, Samantha's getting into the root of the problem.
Yeah, that's the same.
We had a therapy session in my house, but thank God we did that. And that's really our challenge for all of us here today. You know, I said this pasuk from Yirmiyahu. God tells Yirmiyahu, I appointed you today. He says, lintosh, to uproot and pull down, to destroy, laharos, to destroy and overthrow, but also livnot v'lintoa, to build and to plant. Notice that to build and to plant follows all the negatives. Before we could build and plant in our own lives, we really need to take time to think about and reflect on what's going wrong in our lives. What do we need to uproot and uplift and get out before we can build and plant? And I really challenge all of us today to take the time to think about what's going wrong. And God willing, we'll follow how this is.
Thank you. Yes.